The war on drugs. A campaign put into place during Richard Nixon's presidency to reduce the use of drugs made illegal in the 20th century.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
This campaign changed the nation forever, costing nonviolent offenders across the U.S. their freedom. This policy was adopted by many presidents to come.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children.
In short, drugs are sapping our strength as a nation. Turn on the evening news or pick up the morning paper, and you'll see what some Americans know just by stepping out their front door. Our most serious problem today is cocaine, and in particular, crack.
Even today, police and lawmakers target low-income areas through drug arrests. Minorities are incarcerated at an alarming rate in comparison to the white population, especially for possession of marijuana, which is now being legalized in many states. The question is, will the new presidency bring back the war on drugs, or will America finally see a change in the justice system, a change in the way our government combats addiction? Opium, marijuana, LSD, cocaine, ecstasy, and the list goes on. The United States has faced a continuing struggle against drug usage since its rise to popularity in the early 1900s. The government has attempted to solve this problem through mass incarceration, resulting in a disproportionate number of Black and Hispanic inmates serving time for nonviolent offenses. Just outside Union Station, Professor Alvaro Santos works with Georgetown University, studying how the government's current drug policy shapes our country.
Well, the war on drugs is a policy of drug prohibition that has criminalized drug use, consumption, production, and distribution, and it's had really terrible effects. It hasn't really achieved the goals which it was supposed to achieve and the expectations with which it was introduced, which was to stop consumption. Consumption hasn't really decreased, and on the other hand, there's a crisis of violence and also of using the criminal justice system in a way that has produced in the United States one of the highest rate of imprisonment in the world, and so that has had all sorts of negative effects.
The U.S. has higher incarceration rates than countries that are considered to be more oppressive and less democratic, including China, Russia, Iran, and Cuba. The U.S. also has a higher imprisonment rate for minorities. In comparison to the 1 in 17 white men that are incarcerated, 1 in 3 Black men and 1 in 6 Latino men can be expected to go to prison in their lifetime. Not only that, but an investigation conducted by the NAACP found that white people report using drugs 5 times more than African Americans, yet African Americans are sent to prison for drug offenses at 10 times the rate of white people. At Students for Sensible Drug Policy headquarters, located right outside of Chinatown, Representative Jake Agliata works with students to fight the effects of the war on drugs.
It became a way to incarcerate people and get them out of mainstream American society. When marijuana was first made illegal, the word marijuana in of itself was actually coined from racist backgrounds. The plant is called cannabis, and that's what it was called for almost its entire history until the 1930s, when people who wanted to make the cannabis plant illegal for various reasons decided to run a smear campaign that scared people away from using it and associating it with people from Mexico and Latin America. So they started to call it marijuana and justify making it illegal, and the best way to do it was to connect it with these existing racial fears happening in America. But then I think the biggest things, you fast forward to Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, where you see the two biggest really increases in drug war racial disparities. Richard Nixon, it's no secret, now we know that he did enact the war on drugs in large part to suppress the Black vote in America. Ronald Reagan doubled down on that too when he became president, became the same exact thing. You go back to the Bill Clinton administration, the 1994 crime bill was probably one of the most devastating pieces of legislation in American history in terms of incarceration. The crime bill increased a bunch of mandatory minimum sentences and basically made it so that if you are in possession of crack cocaine, you get more of a sentence than you do if you're in possession of cocaine. The reason why that is a racial disparity is because crack cocaine is mostly found in low-income communities, which do tend to be predominantly black.
Those who support the system put in place by the war on drugs seek to eliminate the crime and violence often associated with drug consumption. President Donald Trump hopes to elect Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama as Attorney General. Sessions is a strong advocate for strict drug policy and seeks to root out drugs completely from society through mandatory minimums.
I've been there. I've prosecuted cases. When somebody's facing a 10-year sentence, mandatory minimum, and they know it, and they're not going to go before the judge and talk their way out of it, it makes a difference.
What Senator Sessions is saying is that a criminal on trial that is facing a mandatory minimum sentence is more likely to plead guilty and cooperate with police. An investigation conducted by the U.S. Sentencing Commission, however, found the opposite. They found that less of those convicted of an offense carrying a mandatory minimum had decided to plead guilty than those who were not facing one. Harsh drug policy is not the answer to our problems. Rehabilitation programs should be installed so that addiction is treated as a disease, not a crime. Maryland's Alcohol and Drug Abuse Administration reports that people discharged from rehab programs had lower rates of substance abuse and arrest rates than they did prior to admission.
When we talk about the war on drugs, that's the intent behind this policy. It's never really been about the drugs. It's always been about marginalizing communities of color. Over the past couple of years, we've only seen increases in that.
This nation should come together to face this issue head-on. It's time that we end the war on drugs, once and for all. It's time for us to realize that the root of the problem lies within the justice system, not within the people. It's time for a change.